The carpet prickled the back of my neck as I stared up at the yellow ceiling of my apartment. Smoke curled up from between my fingers, giving the flickering lights and colors of the TV screen a strange life of their own as they bled into the living room. The noise was all but drowned out by this point. I'd gone into a sensory overload that left me numb and wishing my body had some further capacity for substance abuse. My jaw was alive with the nicotine. My head spun from the alcohol in my blood. My eyes were bloodshot and strained, aching in their sockets, but I couldn't bring myself to blink. After my call with Langley, I went through the same loathsome ritual I was only too good at, preparing to wallow in the face of one of the hardest dilemmas I'd faced yet. I hit the gas station for frozen pizzas, a fresh carton of cigarettes, and a few bottles of Wild Turkey. This winning combo had occupied me for at least 3 days. Maybe more. It was hard to tell on benders like this, but I knew I had to face the elephant in the room. I knew sooner or later, Langley would run out of patience waiting for the confirmation that Nathan had been disposed of, the liability dealt with. My curse as a detective was my curse now. I lacked the ability to simply follow instructions without thinking too much. It was shameful, going on a bender like that. It was a cop-out, but I didn't want to face the reality of what I was dealing with. Lying to Langley was easy. Lying to David would be much harder. I like to believe that even after everything I'd done, I had a few lingering shreds of humanity left in me, and I wanted David to think the same. He wouldn't if he knew who I'd been taking orders from this whole time. And I was one of the only people the kid had. He's always been fragile, but that level of betrayal wouldn't just ruin our relationship. It could ruin him. If only he could see why I had to do it. If only he'd realize this was the best way, then he might hear me out. But even after all these years, he was still naive. He still wanted a perfect world. I went around and around like this trying to find a way to salvage what I could from both relationships, but I always ended up in the same place. With the threat of the law on Langley's side, deep down, I knew that when it came to what needed to be done, my choice in this was illusory. Lying there on the floor, I surrendered to that idea. But I still wanted to salvage what I could of my relationship with David. He deserved to know the truth. I knew I shouldn't put my burdens on him, but he's the only one I had. There was always the chance that he might be able to see some alternative option I'd overlooked. But this was only me rationalizing my decision to use the kid as a form of self-punishment. Maybe that's what my bender was all about. Wearing myself down until I no longer had the strength left to keep it all to myself. So I made the drive. I took a hot shower, inhaled a pot of coffee before I grabbed my keys and a few slices of pizza that were salvageable. I had no sense of how much time had passed, as I enjoyed the comfort of having blackout curtains in all my windows. And so it wasn't until I left the house and hit the highway that I even looked at a clock. 2:41 in the morning. I rolled my eyes but drove the rest of the way, stopping only to fill my tank at a truck stop in La Crosse. I hit Osage around 4:15 and figured I'd get a few hours of shut-eye till the sun came up. When I woke, I immediately wish I hadn't. The warm sun had cooked the inside of the car, and I woke up hot, head throbbing and sticky with sweat. I shielded my eyes to the unforgiving sunlight, lumbering my way up to David's door. I banged on it a few times and waited for an answer. After a minute of nothing, I knocked again, harder. And I peered through the reflection of the living room window. I saw no lights on, so I tried the handle. Locked. I knocked again, waiting before growling my displeasure and stalking back to the car. I went to the gas station where he worked. But after checking the place over, I realized pretty quick that he wasn't there. I bought a coffee and got back into the car to light a cigarette, mulling it over with my lethargic, hungover mind. I hadn't once known David to be anywhere other than work or home. Unless, of course, he'd gotten himself arrested again. Something I still knew nothing about, since he wasn't officially charged with anything on the day the cop dropped him at his front door. I thought about his parents' place as an option, but I figured the less I was seen, the better. So I returned to my usual spot, a block or so down from his building, settling in for another few hours in nervous anticipation of his arrival. No way he'd be gone long, but it gave me time to clear my head and think about what I had to say to him. Hours went by, and the sun was sitting low on the horizon when the growing feeling of unease boiled over and I pulled back into his lot, scanning the area before knocking again. I was getting worried, so, with no answer, I didn't hesitate in using a paperclip I found in the car to pick the poorly designed lock. Within seconds, I was inside, calling softly with no response. I walked through the place to check for any signs of life and noticed the drawers to his dresser open and empty, as well as any other possessions you'd think he might need: toothbrush, wallet, so on and so forth. At first, I was relieved that I wasn't walking in on the scene of an overdose or something, but then the fear set in. The worry. I made the rare decision to call his phone, and doing so revealed the device laying forgotten on the bed. It didn't take me long to figure out what might have happened. At first, the initial panic that Langley had gotten to him gripped me, and I began to scramble for a game plan. But after going over it, things didn't add up. If the FBI had taken him, there would have been signs of a search or arrest, something quick and disruptive. He'd had time to take basic supplies with him, lock the door even, and I didn't know who else he'd turn to besides me in a crisis. So he left on his own accord. To where? There was only a couple of places he could go. And I knew of one person who might have some kind of agenda regarding David's whereabouts. Leaving his phone made sense. He didn't want to risk being tracked. Clearly, he was going somewhere he wasn't meant to go. I did 15 over most of the drive back to St. Croix. I was tempted to go straight to Nathan's house, but bringing that kind of attention to myself would break my first rule of engagement. But I knew he'd have answers. Of course, he lived with his mom, for fuck's sake. I cursed my lack of action over the last few days, especially if moves were being made without my knowledge. So I prayed they hadn't done anything to put more red flags on Langley's desk. If either he or his men found out about any of this, I'd surely be hearing about it, and my time would run out. If it came to that, I figured I'd play ignorant, try to keep my bluff going for as long as I could. But for the time being, I'd do whatever I could to find some answers for myself. All I knew was that something was going on, something I had no knowledge of. And as angry as I was, I could only wait, bide my time, and promise myself that sooner or later, I'd get the answers I was looking for. One way or another, Nathan would confess, because if he'd done anything to put David in danger, you can believe I'd put him through hell. I wondered if this was the universe's way of giving me the reasons I needed to justify killing the guy. If so, this was turning out to be a lot easier than I thought.